So a few months back, one of my best friends told me that he was looking for a sort of classic steel road frame, and he wanted to help me find one and restore it. And over the next month or two, we looked around, made a couple offers, and eventually bought this 1988 Schwinn Premis from Craigslist. And as you can see, it's in pretty fantastic condition overall, but it's quite possibly one of the dirtiest frames I've ever worked on. The actual condition of the bike is pretty good. It's basically all original, but with a bunch of extra parts thrown on. And it's just dirty. It's just dirty top to bottom. I think the owner basically just kept adding oil and oil and oil and never actually cleaned it. And what we're going to be doing today is a full teardown of this bike and a rebuild using as many of the original parts as possible and just a deep, deep clean. So if that's the kind of thing you're looking for, along with some tips along the way, get ready. It's going to be a fun 15 minutes. I've never seen a chain that actually stayed connected even when you broke it, quote unquote, using the link. But that just gives a clue as to how dirty this bike is. This video is fun because it's actually his first time seeing it as well. So he will be getting this bike delivered in a few months, but it's been a fun build. I like working on bikes slowly with no time, no rush, just over the winter. As you can see, of course, a lot of white components. This is a really clean build. The 1988 Premis came in two colors. There was this white one and there was a purple one. I think the white one is the move. It's a really clean frame. It's got a great look once it's all cleaned up. The 88 Premis was a 1-year model. After this, it was basically, it's almost identical to the Schwinn Prelude, for those of you who know what that bike is. As you can see down there, that sticker, this is rocking 10X tubing. It's not quite as good as like Reynolds 531, the really high-end steel, but it's a very good steel. This is going to be a really good rider for him. So as you can see, the frame is just, it's not just the dirt, it's just the caked on oil and just, it was ridden a lot, but it wasn't abused. It just wasn't cleaned. It wasn't taken good care of. And you see that a lot in these parts with just a decade or two of just corrosion. One of the things that I like to do, especially on these old frames, is prove that you can loosen the non-drive side first, because, you know, it helps you know how much of this bottom bracket, how hard it's going to be to take out. There was a little bit of rust in here overall, but this was not too bad. I don't think this bike was stored outside. There's not a lot of actual corrosion on this frame. It's just very dirty. Of course, we've got the, this is a 5 or a 6 speed bike. It is indexed, which is kind of fun with those down tube shifters. Dropping that fork out now. Starting to get my first good look at the frame. Pretty dirty, but again, no corrosion, very few actual paint marks. Decided to really try to shine this frame up. So that starts, of course, with a wash. I didn't even take it out to do just a standard soapy wash. This is just an intensive degreaser, all-purpose cleaner sort of mix combo here to really get a bunch of the dirt off. As you can see here, using my wife's dedicated chainstay protector removal tool. This is a kind of a technique that's pulled over from the car world. It's effectively a clay bar, but it's a synthetic clay, and it really gets out a lot of that grit that's embedded into the paint, which is quite nice. And since I've got the frame stripped all the way down, I decided to go ahead and polish or compound and polish it using a machine polisher. It's hard to see in this shot right now, but this is where I realized, like, oh, this is going to be a really nice frame once it's clean. Once you get this paint back, I think this actually, if I'm remembering right, this actually had a clear coat on it, and it really shined up very well. I was really happy with it. As you can see working on the rear derailleur here, this gives an idea of the amount of dirt. It was just all over this bike, this sort of oily dirt, and it just made everything so dirty to work on. But all of these parts, like I said, I don't think they were necessarily abused. You had that, what you're looking at there, all over the bike. My ultrasonic cleaner and degreaser got a workout, just getting every part basically clean, and of course polished as well. And as you can see, already just a deep ultrasonic cleaning, oil, polishing all of the parts and rebuilding this derailleur, pretty good. So this crank, we're going to have to talk about this crank. Initially, I thought I would just be able to tear it apart, clean it up, and put it back on the bike. But unfortunately, this chainring, the large chainring there, was very worn. As you can see right here, I was like, did I forget a bolt? Nope, it's just greased on there. So these cranks, these FX SLP cranks, are interesting because it's basically a painted white. It looks pretty good, but unfortunately his, of course, was dirty. So I decided, again, to polish it, and I was pretty happy with how this spider arm turned out. This shot doesn't show the clear too well, but it looks good. So I was able to find a new old stock 52, I think, maybe a 54, and we decided to go ahead and keep the little ring because it wasn't showing as much wear. So I was able to just, of course, reassemble it. There's thread locker on all these chainring bolts, of course. The non-drive side arm, a very similar thing. A lot of degreaser, polish it up. It starts to look pretty good. You can start to see a little bit of that shine there. That's when I was like, all right, this is going to look really good. Just one of the things that I like to do, anytime you've got these caged headset bearings, I often replace them for non-caged bearings. Caged bearings are really nice for assembly, but if you use non-caged, you will get a few more bearings in there. It's probably a marginal gain, but get a little more support for the headset. So I went ahead and made that change there as well. These bars, I really like these bars. It's just a very classic profile. I ended up going with a very similar pair of Nito bars for my RB1 build. If you want to check that out, there's a link in the comments. Quill stem here. Boy, that was corroded. That was rough, but thankfully a lot of time in Evaporust cleaned that right up. Here's my weekly build video pitch for anti-seize. Remember, grease is fairly good at preventing corrosion, but anti-seize is often better, especially for parts that interface and they're not intended to move, exactly like quill stems into the top of fork tubes. This is carbon assembly paste. As the name implies, it's really, the main reason you use it is on carbon bikes, but it's basically a grease with some grit in it. Lets you get a little more purchase on parts. So these white brake hoods were sort of the bane of this build, and I could not find replacements in the Aero brake hoods, so I was like, I have to clean these. And as you can see, nothing was working. Magic Eraser wasn't working, degreaser wasn't working, soap, stronger degreaser wasn't working, and just making no dent at all. And on a whim, I decided, what if I use my Goo Gone? Will that get the grease off? And holy crap, instantly, it just pulled that dirt off. And I was so happy to find something that worked. And it wasn't perfect. They're still not bright white, but it actually did work. It cleaned them up. So we'll see that later. I really like the white components on this bike. They weren't made specifically for the bike, but a lot of these parts, like the group set, didn't primarily come in white, so it was a kind of a white build, and I really like it. These Diacomp brakes, I think, look really nice, actually. From my testing, they're really not very powerful, even for side pull brakes. There's a lot of flex in them, but this AccuShift indexed down tube is pretty fun. So he will actually get to be able to choose whether he wants friction shifting or indexed shifting in the rear. This is probably the one complaint that I had on this bike. The way it was built, you're intended to use basically a full-length rear brake cable housing rather than having a stop and letting the cable run exposed over the top tube. The drawback here is the rear brake has a lot more resistance than the front brake. And it doesn't really matter, but it's one of those things that I'm particularly sensitive to. I wish they hadn't done that. Looking at the front derailleur here, getting a good sense of how this bike was. But just 20 minutes in the ultrasonic cleaner, a little bit of oil. You don't even have to tear that apart and it cleans right up. So as you might have seen in the beginning, the bike originally came with, well, not originally, but as we got it, it came with some plastic platform pedals. So we were able to track down on eBay the original pedals that would have come on this bike. They were pretty notchy. They needed a full rebuild as well as a polish. It was really easy to do. You can see on the left there the polished pedal body versus the original on the right, and then just re-greasing that, putting some more bearings in there, dropping the pedal spindle back in. 30 minutes worth of work, and we've got essentially brand new pedals. I did decide to go ahead and transition this bike to a sealed cartridge bottom bracket, again with lots of anti-seize for the next person to have to disassemble this, because it's probably going to be you. But these sealed bottom brackets are just an improvement in every way. You don't have to deal with the alignment of cup and cone, as well as this is going to last a lot longer. So these Tanga LN3922s, I put one on my RB1 as well. Really happy with that bottom bracket. So like I said, we talked about the crank earlier. This was kind of the bane of this bike. It looks great, but as you can see here in a second, there's a little bit of a problem with it. So dropping down the front derailleur to line it up with the chainring was very easy, but then I noticed this little wobble, and it seems like this bike, the chainring must have been bent, because I did notice that before, but I thought it was in the chainring itself, but now I realize that that bend is actually in the spider. So we're only going to be able to dial in the shifting performance so well on this. We can't really dial it in because can't get the front derailleur quite far enough. I don't want him to have drop chains on the outside. So it's just going to be a compromise on, this is still a 30 or 40-year-old bike. So the rear freewheel was just so dirty. Again, 45 minutes in an ultrasonic really cleaned it up, but unfortunately it stripped out all the grease from the inside. So I did decide to basically open it up, rebuild it, new bearings, new grease, and now it's working great. So when it comes time to reassemble these bikes, this is the fun part for me, because all these vintage bikes, there's just not many parts on them. 2 derailleurs, chain, couple cables, and you can actually build a bike very quickly once all the parts are cleaned up. So I'll spend a long time cleaning, and then assembly happens really fast. We did decide to go with an all-white build out on this bike, which is a bold move, and I'm really happy he did it. I really like it. White bar tape is going to look awesome. So this is one of the tips that I am pushing so hard because it works so well. Electrical tape is great for actually holding your bar tape down, but the problem is it gets sticky in the hot sun. Use this self-fusing silicone tape. It sticks to itself and nothing else. It doesn't get sticky in the sun, and it's just so much better. We picked up this suede white saddle off eBay, and in my opinion, I love the way this completes the build. So here it is, all done, and this is a clean bike. I am very happy with how it turned out for him. I really like the build on this. I think it's so easy to look at these 80s or 90s frames and just see them as old and not really see them for the great design and how awesome they actually look. And one of the reasons I really like doing these old builds is when you bring these bikes back to the quality they were when they rolled out, all of a sudden you look at it and you think, this is actually a really good looking bike. I think if a bike came out that looked this nice today, people would be all over it. And just because it's old doesn't mean it's bad. He is going to use this as a rider. I am very happy with how it turned out. I hope he loves it. I hope you enjoyed this video.